What are some theories from the past? Scientists got incredibly wrong. Story 1, the Aristotelian interpretation of gravity was that everything was made of four elements: earth, air, fire, water, and everything wanted to return to its core state. So heavy things fall to the ground because they're mostly earth. Burning wood separates the air elements, smoke, from the earth elements, charcoal, etc. If you think about the states of matter, gas, air, liquid, water, solid, earth, and plasma, fire, Aristotle's abstractions don't seem so crazy given his time. They're pretty close, but not abstract. Also, Aristotle's theory fits with empirical observations. Rocks drop through water, air in a balloon moves up when pushed underwater, and we can see fire moving up. From our naked eye, it looks like the sun is moving in around the earth. So he deduced from his observations that these things each had a home that tended towards. Story 2, sterile techniques in medicine. The first doctor who tried standardizing hand washing for surgeons was ridiculed to the point of a nervous breakdown, committed to an asylum, and beaten to death by the guards. To think how many millions of lives were lost unnecessarily throughout history because we somehow didn't figure out that dirty wounds are so much more dangerous than clean ones. Joseph Lister, the person who Listerine is named after, was another early pioneer working on sterile conditions and hand washing. When his sister, maybe sister-in-law, needed abdominal surgery to remove a cancerous cyst from her reproductive system, he performed it on his dining room table at home because a wealthy person's home was much cleaner and safer than a hospital. He did so with no anesthesia. She lived for multiple years after his intervention. Story 3, my grandfather died during a surgery to remove ulcers from his stomach. At the time, ulcers were believed to be just caused by excess acid in the stomach. Treatment was just palliative with antacids and diet until you had to remove the ulcers. It was the widespread belief that bacteria cannot survive in the human stomach due to the acid. Nowadays, he would just take an oral antibiotic for a week and the ulcers would be gone. Penicillin was available at the time, just that the doc did not believe that ulcers could be caused by bacteria. A bacteria called Heliobacter pylori can colonize the stomach. Once it is done, it decreases the natural production of protective alkaline mucus that normally lines the stomach. The lack of protection against the stomach's naturally produced chloride acid results in ulcers. Antibiotics kill the bacteria and so the ulcers can heal. Story 4, historian of science here. One interesting example that comes to mind is the phlogiston theory to explain combustion and oxidation. Scientists were baffled by these natural processes, and it was a German chemist named Georg Stahl who proposed that combustible compounds contained a substance called phlogiston that was released when they burned or oxidized. After combustion, for example, the smoky air that resulted was phlogisticated air, later known to be mostly nitrogen and carbon dioxide. It was primarily the later work of Antoine Lavoisier cleared this up. Chemistry was one of the last branches of science to become what we call a mature science, as by the mid-18th century, it still clung to Aristotelian and medieval alchemical notions. This case is often held up as a good example of Thomas Kuhn's model of how scientific revolutions actually occur. His book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, is still widely read, and it's the reason that terms like paradigm and paradigm shift are so widely used today. Story 5, that ulcers were caused by stress. Barry Marshall was convinced they were in part caused by bacterial infection. No one believed him, so he figured out how to culture the suspect bacteria, infected himself, and then cured himself. He won the Nobel Prize. I read a meta-study about doctors trying out things on themselves because no one else believed in their crazy theories. They found about 450 such studies. Between 5 and 10 of them died. Roughly the same number won Nobel Prizes. The study has exact numbers, but I don't remember them right now. I just found it hilarious, but also strangely reasonable, that the same number of doctors died because they were crazy as was awarded the Nobel Prize because they were right all along. Story 6, the notion that allergies are psychosomatic. During the 1930s and 1940s, psychiatry was a hot field, and almost nothing was known about immunology. The idea of psychosomatic ailments was intriguing, and several psychiatrists proposed that allergies and asthma were psychosomatic. Physicians responded to childhood asthma and allergies by performing a parentectomy, literally splitting up families and sending children to live in rural group homes. Sometimes a child's health did improve from this intervention. Yet rather than searching for other causes, such as mold in the walls of the family's home, the psychiatrists assumed they had rescued those kids from toxic parenting practices. The association of allergic to for something someone didn't like entered popular usage during this era as a result of some of the things those psychiatrists wrote for the general public. That notion turned out to be nonsense. It got debunked by the late 1960s when microbiologists identified which part of the immune system was malfunctioning. Yet, allergic to Mondays is something people still say, and a substantial share of people with life-threatening allergies have been poisoned by family members or acquaintances who were trying to prove that the problem was all in your head. Story 7. The luminiferous ether theory. It sounds so good and yet was incredibly wrong. The theory functions as a wave. There must be a medium for that wave to travel through. That is, it can't travel through a vacuum. So the medium was a proposed luminiferous ether that we cannot see that only photons interact with. Sounds like dark matter to me, and one can see how it makes logical sense. All wrong. Story 8. Maternal impressionism. The belief that birth defects were caused by the woman either being startled by something or having impure thoughts while she was pregnant. One of the most common examples was the belief that a cleft palate or hair lip was caused by a pregnant woman either being startled by a rabbit or having gluttonous thoughts about rabbit meat, but the stories from the days when this was accepted theory can get wild. My favorite was a case of a white woman who gave birth to a suspiciously dark-skinned child, but then managed to convince everyone that no, she hadn't been sleeping with one of the slaves, she had just been praying too much to Melchior, the black wise man. What's wild is that the professor who taught me about this would regularly tour the country, giving lectures about maternal impressionism, and she would still have people come up to her afterwards to tell her that, no, that really is how it works. She said it was particularly common to get it in places with large Mormon populations. Story 9. Lamarck's theory, known as Lamarckism or the theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics, proposed that an organism can change during its lifetime in response to its environment, and these changes are passed on to its offspring. According to Lamarck, organisms have an innate drive to become more complex and improve themselves. As they face challenges or demands from their environment, they develop new characteristics or modify existing ones through use or disuse of certain organs. These acquired characteristics are then inherited by the offspring, leading to evolutionary change over time. However, Lamarck's theory was later disproven by Darwin's theory of natural selection, which provided a more accurate explanation of how evolution occurs. Story 10. Thomas Migley, who invented CFCs that caused incredible damage to the ozone layer and improved gasoline by adding lead to it. Dr. Benjamin Spock, an excellent pediatrician who wrote an excellent book about childcare where he recommended babies on their stomachs. As it turned out later, this greatly increases the risk of sudden infant death syndrome. On the other, Ignaz Semmelweis, he tried to normalize hand washing before operations in childbirth, but no one listened to him. These three cases demonstrate that in science, only time can say the final word, as probably in everything else. After all, those who burned people in the Middle Ages also they were helping the burned receive lesser punishments after judgment. Story 11, a classic example is stomach ulcers. For hundreds of years, ulcers were attributed to excessive stomach acid and were treated symptomatically or even surgically. In 1982, two Australian doctors discovered the H. pylori bacteria, and their research was rejected because it was conventional wisdom that bacteria couldn't survive in the acidic stomach. It was eventually accepted as fact, and treating ulcers with antibiotics became the standard. The doctors were awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine for their work. Story 12, Charles Lyell was instrumental in understanding deep time through the principles of geological gradualism, the theory of uniformitarianism. The present is the key to the past, which opened up our understanding of the formation of Earth. However, he went all in on this thinking and rejected any suggestion that sudden, catastrophic events had ever occurred in Earth's history. Due to his theory's usefulness for generations, scientists adopted his thinking, and the very suggestion of a catastrophic extinction event, like what we now understand, wiped out the dinosaurs, was dismissed as complete fantasy. Story 13, Plate tectonics, originally known as continental drift. Huge resistance first, especially in the US, An entire conference was convened in the 1920s entirely to present papers showing what a stupid idea it had to have been. Geologists didn't think a meteorologist like Wegener, despite having been on a number of polar geological expeditions, could possibly know what he was talking about. And it didn't help that evidence was misunderstood. For instance, it was pointed out repeatedly that the shorelines didn't match up as neatly as he claimed. Well, that's because he had made that claim, not about the contemporary shorelines, but the ancient ones, based on minerals found a certain distance offshore. As noted in another comment, it took a few decades for enough evidence to come in and convince everyone. Well, almost everyone. Even in the 80s, a few prominent skeptical geologists got themselves cover stories in Popular Science and other such magazines for interviews talking about problems with the theory and why we still aren't convinced. Further back in geology, there was the 19th century debate between the volcanists, who thought all rocks originated in volcanoes, and Neptunists, all rock formed on the ocean floor. In the early going, both sides were not above fudging or faking data and then accusing their opponents of the same. Today, while the research done by the Neptunists has proved invaluable to our understanding of sedimentary rock, the volcanists have clearly won. Story 14, String Theory, why? It failed to predict anything. It basically is so convoluted that not even people working on it know where to take it. There is, however, one physical prediction that string theory does make: the value of a quantity called the cosmological constant, a measure of the energy of the vacuum. Recent observations of distant supernovae indicate that this quantity is very small, but not zero. A simple argument in string theory indicates that the cosmological constant should be at least around 55 orders of magnitude larger than the observed value. This is perhaps the most incorrect experimental prediction ever made by any physical theory that anyone has taken seriously. Basically, it's a dead-end theory. At this point, people who wasted their lives on it are too afraid of just acknowledging the fact. Story 15. When I was growing up, science said that there was no evidence of planets outside our solar system. They said that there was no life other than on Earth. They said the universe was much younger than they say now. Fat was not a food group. It was something to avoid. Eggs were not good for you. Cold fusion was a farce. The Earth was getting colder and we were headed straight into an ice age. They'd never recover. We would run out of oil by 1980s, 1990s, the 2000s, etc. Cloning was science fiction. History is full of science that has been proven wrong. It is the nature of science. Some things hold up over time, some things don't. Story 16, Aristotle's theory of spontaneous generation is one of the most classical debunked theories of biology. The theory stated that life, which included all living organisms, plants and animals, could come from a non-living body. This means a living organism can be produced through a spontaneous reaction from a non-living reactant. Lastly, he believed this could only be possible if the living matter contained something he called pneuma, which translated to vital heat. He used the famous fish, eel, and frog experiment in an attempt to prove the consistency of his theory. Story 17, that smoking cigarettes was good for you, or at the very least, that it can fit into a healthy lifestyle, sort of like the occasional glass of wine. What's interesting is that a lot of people 100 plus years ago were campaigning against cigarettes, but for the wrong reasons. For example, if young girls do it, it won't be very like. Pretty much all of the data we have about cigarettes causing cancer and or heart disease and or aging are very new, newer than a lot think. Same with drinking while pregnant. Story 18, that debris in a stream impairs salmon runs. Large logs and rocks create a varied environment and slow stream velocity, making it easier for salmon and providing rest areas. Total obstructions and bottlenecks are bad, so dams are not good. But a lot of work went into removing natural obstructions to save salmon runs just a couple decades ago. Then that work had to be undone later. It is expensive and difficult to fly logs back up to mountain streams using helicopters. Ask the Fish by Leftover Salmon is a great song that echoes that older view of stream ecology. Story 19, Luminiferous Ether. After the whole light as a particle and light as a wave argument came down in favor of light as a wave, people started asking, what sort of medium is the light wave transmitted in? If you think about it, all other waves are transmitted through a substance: solid, rope, steel, or rock, in the case of earthquakes. Liquids, Water is the obvious example. Or gases. And generally, the stiffer the substance, the faster the wave. People already knew that light was very fast, and it could apparently pass through empty space, which waves are not supposed to be able to do. So, this astonishing substance called ether was theorized, something that was fluid enough to fill all space, yet was amazingly rigid to support the high frequencies of light waves. It had to be massless, transparent, without viscosity, or else it would impart an observable drag on planets, and incompressible, and all these things at once. The thing is, nobody could really wrap their heads around the concept of a wave just going off into empty space. Even an electromagnetic wave, as all people knew back then, is that to create a varying electric field, one needed electrically charged matter. Increasingly complex experiments were devised to detect the ether, with all the experiments producing null results, no detection. But as experiment after experiment kept on producing null result after null result, the theories about what ether was and how it interacted with the universe got wilder and wilder. It took Einstein's development of special relativity and his explanation of the photoelectric effect by reimagining light as a series of particles with a wave-like nature for the ether theory to truly be killed. Story 20, geologist here. We don't know nearly as much about plate tectonics as the layperson might think. Plate tectonics is, in a lot, our unifying theory. A lot of the theories behind the mechanisms of plate tectonics and what drives the movement and how rifts and subduction zones form or how volcanoes form, etc., etc., seem a little tenuous to me. I suspect that a lot of those will eventually be proven to be false. You know how people bring up the fact that 95% of our oceans are unexplored, and they represent 70% of the Earth's surface? Imagine how difficult it is for us to study what's going on in the approximately 12,000 kilometers diameter below that surface. Story 21, that women are born with a set number of eggs. This has recently been proven untrue in mice and may extend to humans. It's thought that the idea came from one or two studies from the 50s, where they took pictures and counted. Since then, it's just been repeated incessantly until everyone believed it. Most likely, there are stem cells just like in men for the production of eggs. This would greatly change our ideas of reproduction and how we approach reproductive medicine. Story 22, animal intelligence being fundamentally different from human intelligence. This is not an accepted scientific fact, but it is a commonly assumed idea. While it has been mostly abandoned and made irrelevant among people who do research in intelligence, I find that this sort of idea is very common in most lay conversations about intelligence. We are going to come to understand the common neurological basis of intelligence very soon, and then we will very quickly see how the brains of other species are different neurological arrangements that directly translate into superior performance for tasks particularly important to the ecological niche that those animals occupy. It is just a difference of configuration crossed with a difference in quantity, but configuration will matter much more than people think it does now. We are not super geniuses with enormous brains. We are animals with slightly larger brains that are configured to do a set of tasks that are particularly useful and, importantly, self-improving via transmission of knowledge across generations. This will mean that we will be better at picking out common neurological verbs between species. Attributing human-like behavior to animals, my dog is sad, my dog is being generous, will seem less like a pathetic fallacy. It should not seem like a pathetic fallacy anyway, except in ridiculous cases, as after all, we are mammals. So if we are capable of a neurological phenomenon, a thought, then there is absolutely no reason that another animal with a brain cannot have it as well, given the right condition. And we know we have common brain structures with dogs and cats. Story 23. I still hold that dark matter and dark energy are just a fudge factor because of an incomplete understanding of physics and mathematics. Of course, for now, that's our option. And evidence we have so points to its existence, but would be in no way surprised if at some point in the future somebody realizes that our model of the universe is just wrong and dark matter and energy is just the best we could do to make it fit our current model. There is definitely an argument here for dark energy, but dark matter is known a little more concretely. It's kind of a bad nomenclature, but we're stuck with it now. Dark matter is dark because it doesn't interact electromagnetically, no light. But dark energy is dark because we have no idea what it is. We can directly see evidence of the existence of dark matter, like the bullet cluster, that is. There is something there, not just a math error in the theory. There are tons of ideas on what the particles might actually be, only interacting via the weak force, etc. And we're on our way to learning more. Story 24, I'm a PhD candidate in the biomedical sciences. I've thought about this quite a bit. The amount of false publications and poorly defended data out there is staggering. I think the biggest development will not be proving things wrong, but the development of an overarching unifying theory of all things which explains the nature of life, chemistry, physics, biology. The one common thing is that in all fields of science and math, as discovery progresses, things become more and more complex and convoluted. I really think there must be a simpler and more elegant overall element we're not seeing. How long this will take, I don't know. I don't think we'll see it in the next few generations, but maybe one day. Edit. I'm speaking as a biologist. I would argue that my field of study is one of the most immature. We're still largely in the observe and learn phase of discovery. My limited understanding of advanced physics may lessen the relevance of my ideas, but when I see things like massive particle accelerators doing collisions at extreme velocities, only to discover new, smaller, and more abstract particles, I can't help but think it can't all be as complicated as smaller and abstract fractions of matter and energy. Story 25. First of all, the idea of fact in science is something that doesn't exist at all. The strongest ideas that we have are theories, which are just ideas that have been sledgehammered with opinions and contrasting hypotheses to the point where they are proven to be as correct as they could possibly be. Scientists are still trying to disprove the law of gravity to this day. We have no idea what leaves will turn over through the rest of our time. Any scientist who is worth his weight will never refer to his findings as fact, which is why you hear theory thrown around so much. Scientists are naturally skeptical, and finding out new things that challenge our preconceptions is what makes science what it is. Edit. Shoot, I didn't notice this got upvoted. Wow. What I did mean to say is that fact really doesn't stay permanent in any case, such as the world being flat. Everything has another side to it that in some ridiculous way could prove it wrong. It could be insanely out of this world in a lot of situations, but you truly don't know what could be lurking out in the world. I apologize if I was unclear in my post. I didn't mean to upset people, but yeah, I'm pretty firm on that skeptical manner of thinking, and I don't think it's truly possible to have all the facts in any case whatsoever. There will always be more to know in any case. Story 26. Almost all of psychology. The bottom line is, psychology is pretty new. Although we understand how many things occur, which at a basic level is, stimulus goes in, some form of processing occurs, then some sort of reactions occur. A physiological reaction happens, a memory is made, a habit is formed, etc. However, even with studies on brain damage, and where certain elements of cognition occur, we have barely scratched the surface on why the brain functions in its ways. As a psych student, what always blows me away is how predictable some behaviors can be, and how other behaviors are incredibly different to predict or understand. I'm excited to be part of the future of it all, that's for sure. Story 27. As a student of physics, I spent my entire college career thinking that eventually every equation and theory I was taught would be proven wrong or incomplete, most within my lifetime. The important thing that I took away from my physics education is that what we study are models of the real situation. My pragmatic electrical engineering friend claimed Maxwell's equations are the most accurate description of what we see, to which I responded that it is simply the average behavior of the richer pattern of QED, which still isn't the complete story. He agreed, but he had a good enough model to approach his interests and pointed out the fine details yield little additional practical insight. Much of undergraduate physics is just a linear approximation to the subject of interest to make the math approachable. I also study computer science and computation theory. Gödel's theorems have made me wonder if it is even possible to parse physical law into a closed set of formulas. Perhaps the strange nature of quantum mechanics and summing over infinite combinations of all outcomes, an impossible task save for approximation, is a reflection of this. Perhaps nature is ultimately uncomputable in its finest detail.